Good evening, and welcome to Midvalley Bible Church's virtual prayer meeting for Wednesday, May 26th. My name is Doug Hornock, and I'm the pastor at Midvalley Bible Church. I'm recording this on Tuesday, and one of the requests that I'm going to ask you to pray for is the closing on the sale of our church's undeveloped land east of our current campus. That sale is scheduled to be completed this coming Friday, and our long 2-year adventure is about to come to completion. And with it, Midvalley Bible Church is going to move into a new phase of ministry as we have more resources for outreach and staff and the greater ability to minister to the needs of God's people and the lost about us. Last week I was speaking to our former pastor, Pastor Ken, who pastored here for 39 years. And was involved in all the relocations of the then Murray Bible Church and later Midvalley Bible Church. And I think he was as excited as I am and optimistic about the future. And he said, I never thought I'd see this happen. And I think there are a lot of people who have felt that way. But it looks like the end is in sight. And I'm grateful to all who have helped make this happen. I want to thank you for your patience, for your understanding, and most importantly, for your prayers. It's not yet complete, but the end is in sight. Sometime back, over 400 bikers gathered to pay their last respects to Grandpa Bob. Grandpa Bob's real name was Bob Shields, and he was a founding member of the once feared, notorious, outlawed motorcycle gang known as the Bandidos. He had died of cancer at the age of 78. And for his memorial, middle-aged and older bikers gathered to drink beer, swap stories of the good old days of drug running, assault, terrorism, and murder, not to mention some of the legal sins that they engaged in. But what caught my attention was the macho manner in which they attempted to deal with death and the reality of a future judgment. One gray-bearded biker said, "Give 'em hell, Grandpa." Still another said, "The devil's in the unemployment line now." Another heavily tattooed gang member named Lamont is reported to have said, "Where he's gone, that's where we're all going someday. He's just waiting on us." The article then went on to say that Grandpa Bob had written the following: "I don't want no preachers ranting and raving over me. Besides, I'm down below drinking whiskey and doing so on the devil's tab." Now, I don't know if those bikers believe that there is a hell, but they certainly have an incorrect view of it. And what's more, they have an incorrect view of the wrath of God, which is one of the attributes of God that I want to talk about for just a moment, and then again also next week. Now, most people don't want to think about God's wrath, God's coming judgment. They prefer to think and speak of God's love, and those who do believe that God is a God of wrath as well as a God of love prefer to think of his wrath in the past tense. Many seem to believe that God's wrath is an Old Testament truth and concept, and that with the coming of Jesus Christ, we are now safe to think only in terms of God's love and God's grace and his forgiveness. And nothing could be further from the truth. A.W. Pink, who has written a marvelous and helpful book on the attributes of God, says this concerning God's wrath: "It is sad to find so many professing Christians who appear to regard the wrath of God as something for which they need to make an apology, or at least they wish there were no such thing. While some would not go so far as to openly admit that they consider it a blemish on the divine character, yet they are far from regarding it with delight. They like not to think about it, and they rarely hear it mentioned without a secret resentment rising up in their hearts against it. Even with those who are more sober in their judgment, not a few seem to imagine that there is a severity about the divine wrath, which is too terrifying to form a theme for profitable contemplation. Others harbor the delusion, the misguided thinking that God's wrath is not consistent with his goodness, and so seek to banish it from their thoughts. Now, that is the attitude, unfortunately, of many. Many turn away from a vision of God's wrath as though it were some part of an imperfection, an unacceptable attribute of God. That God's wrath, God's judgment is out of line with his character. But the question you have to ask and answer is, what do the scriptures teach? Well, as you turn to the Bible, the first thing you will find is that God makes no attempt to conceal the fact of his wrath. God's not ashamed to make it known that vengeance and fury belong to him. In other words, the wrath of God is not just taught in the Bible, it's a prominent truth in the Bible. Again, citing the words of A.W. Pink, he writes, "A study of the concordance will show that there are more references in Scripture to the anger, fury, and wrath of God than there are to his love and tenderness." The wrath of God is an attribute of God, as much a part of God as any other attribute, an attribute without which God would be less than God. Now, the wrath of God is as much a divine perfection as is his faithfulness, power, or mercy. It must be so, for there is no blemish whatever, not the slightest defect in the character of God. Yet, Pink writes, there would be if wrath were absent from him. Now, this is a very important topic. And because that's the case, this is as far as I want to go tonight. And I want to talk more about it next week. And so with that before us now, let's now go to prayer.